Why is crude oil called the engine of the global economy? One move shakes the entire world. It is around midnight. A tanker is passing through the Arabian Sea. Ships loaded with thousands of containers are moving in different directions. An aircraft is being refueled at some airport, and behind the chimney of some refinery, machines are working without stopping. From above, the world may look like it is asleep, but the truth is that even at this moment, the global economy is awake, running, and in its veins a black liquid is constantly flowing. The frightening part is that if this flow stops even for a few days, then not only will there be lines at petrol pumps, but factories, flights, freight, inflation, currency, the stock market, and even governments will be shaken. That is why crude oil is called not just a fuel, but the engine of the global economy. Because the speed of the modern world still depends on it to a very large extent. When we talk about crude oil, usually only petrol and diesel come to mind. But the power of crude is far bigger than that. According to the IEA, global oil demand remained at a high level in 2024. And according to OPEC, average global oil demand reached 104 million barrels per day in 2024. The IEA also said that oil's share in global energy demand did fall below 30%, but it is still one of the world's biggest and most influential energy streams. That means energy transition has its place. EVs have their place, renewables have their place, but as of today, the backbone of transport, trade, petrochemicals, and strategic security is still oil. That is why the crude oil price chart is watched not just by commodity traders, but also by finance ministers and central banks. If crude oil suddenly disappeared from the world, the first shock would hit transport. According to the EIA, refineries process crude oil into products such as gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel, and from an average 42-gallon barrel, around 19 to 20 gallons of motor gasoline, 11 to 13 gallons of distillate fuel, meaning mostly diesel, and 3 to 4 gallons of jet fuel can come out. Now think about how much of cars, trucks, buses, tractors, mining machines, aircraft, ships, and heavy logistics depends on this chain. That means crude is not just a raw material, but the base material of movement. The day oil logistics stumble, the nervous system of the supply chain starts trembling. And once the supply chain trembles, the pulse of the world's shops, factories, and markets all begins to go out of rhythm. That is why economists also consider oil a silent trigger of inflation. When crude becomes expensive, not only do petrol and diesel prices rise, but transport costs rise. Freight becomes more expensive, insurance becomes more expensive, packaging costs go up, factory input costs rise, and in the end the effect reaches the ordinary consumer. Both the EIA and the IEA have repeatedly shown that oil market shocks affect the broader economy, because oil is used not just in the fuel tank, but throughout the production and distribution network. The truck that brings vegetables from the field to the market, the trailer that pulls containers from the port to the warehouse, the airline's jet fuel bill, thermal systems, heavy equipment. All of their costs are affected by crude. That is why when crude oil becomes expensive, sooner or later its heat reaches even your kitchen. But the story of crude oil does not end with transport. The IEA's petrochemicals analysis says that petrochemicals will remain a major driver of oil demand growth in the coming decades. Plastics, fibrous detergents, solvents, fertilizers, pesticides, paints, synthetic rubbers, many building blocks of pharmaceuticals, and countless industrial chemicals. All of these are rooted in oil and natural gas feedstocks. In other words, crude oil does not just run vehicles, it also creates the material world of modern life. The plastic bottle from which you drink water, the polyester clothes you wear, the paint with which you color a wall, the tire on which a vehicle runs, and the fertilizer that increases production in the field. All of them contain oil-based chemistry somewhere. That is why a disruption in crude supply can become not just a fuel crisis, but a manufacturing crisis too. Now understand why crude oil is called a weapon of geopolitics. Among the world's most important oil choke points, the Strait of Hormuz is counted at the top. According to the US EIA, in 2024, an average of 20 million barrels of oil passed through the strait every day, which was around 20% of global petroleum liquids consumption. In the first quarter of 2025 too, the flow remained broadly at the same level. This means that roughly 1 out of every 5 barrels of oil in the world depended on this narrow waterway. Now if tension rises on this route, insurance becomes more expensive, tankers start avoiding it, or military risk increases. Then panic in the market becomes almost certain. That is why tension in the Middle East is not just regional news. It is a risk written onto the global balance sheet. That is exactly why the crude oil chart also moves with politics and war psychology. Decisions by players like America, Saudi Arabia, Russia, Iran, the UAE, and OPEC can send shocks through the global market. According to OPEC's 2025 Annual Statistical Bulletin, in 2024 OPEC member countries exported an average of 19 million barrels per day of crude, and around 72% of it went to Asia. This shows how deeply Asia, especially import-dependent economies, depends on oil flows. If producer countries cut output, if shipping routes become risky, if sanctions are imposed, or if demand forecasts change, crude prices react instantly. And when crude reacts, uneasiness spreads to currencies, stock markets, bond yields, and even inflation expectations. That is why investors also see oil as an economic thermometer. For countries like India, crude oil is an even bigger issue because demand here is huge and import dependence is also very high. According to country consumption data based on the 2025 Statistical Review of World Energy, in 2024, the United States remained the world's biggest oil consumer, followed by China and then India. According to that same data set, in 2024, US oil consumption was around 19 million barrels per day. China's was 16 million barrels per day, and India's was 5.6 million barrels per day. The meaning is clear. India is now very high on the global oil demand map. That is why the impact of oil price fluctuations on India does not remain limited only to petrol and diesel. Its effect reaches the current account, inflation, pressure on the rupee, the import bill, and even fiscal calculations. That is why calling crude oil the engine of the global economy is not just a dramatic line, but a data-backed reality. According to OPEC, global oil demand in 2024 was 104 million barrels per day. On the other hand, the IEA says that the pattern of oil demand growth is changing. Road fuels are plateauing in some markets, but petrochemical feedstocks, jet fuel, and some emerging economy uses are supporting demand. That means oil's role is changing, but not disappearing. At one time, oil seemed mostly like the story of cars and trucks, but now it has become the combined story of aviation, petrochemicals, freight, shipping, and industrial systems. That is why the world's engine is connected not just to the fuel tank, but also to the refinery, chemical plant, logistics corridor, and trade lane. Now let us talk about reserves, because power begins where control over supply begins. According to OPEC, by the end of 2024, the world's proven crude oil reserves stood at 1,567 billion barrels. According to Reuters and EIA reporting, Venezuela is the world's largest holder of proven oil reserves, with around 303 billion barrels. According to widely cited reserve compilations, Saudi Arabia and Iran come after that, while Canada, Iraq, the UAE, Kuwait, Russia, Libya, and the United States are also among the major reserve holders. But here is an interesting point. Having reserves and having production power are not the same thing. Venezuela is the biggest example of this. Despite having the world's largest reserves, production can remain severely limited due to political instability, sanctions, infrastructure decay, and heavy crude challenges. That means the oil game is not just about how much you have, but also about how much you can extract and how easily you can sell it. That is why sometimes a country with smaller reserves can still become a more powerful producer. America is a major example of this. From EIA and IEA data, it is clear that the US remains a superpower in both production and consumption. On the other hand, countries like Saudi Arabia hold outsized influence in the oil market because of reserve flexibility and spare capacity. That means global oil politics is a combined game of reserve maps, production costs, shipping routes, refining capacity, and military security. That is why oil is not just a matter of geology, but also a matter of strategy. The country that has reserves, production, export routes, and pricing influence carries more weight in global equations. That is why military presence, alliances, and diplomatic bargaining around oil-rich regions always look unusually intense. Now the question is, will the power of crude oil weaken after renewable energy expands? The answer is, slowly in some sectors, but not suddenly. According to the IEA's Global Energy Review 2025, oil's share in global energy demand has gone below 30%, which signals a structural shift. But at the same time, the IEA also shows that petrochemical feedstocks, aviation, and many emerging market users are still supporting oil demand. According to Stanford's Understand Energy resource, petroleum-based fuels still make up a massive share of global transportation energy. That means EVs are increasing, solar and wind are increasing, efficiency is also improving. But modern transport and the material economy still have not reached a point where oil can be replaced overnight. So the oil engine may weaken, but it has not stopped yet. And that is why crude oil prices affect market psychology so strongly. When oil goes up, airline shares can come under pressure. The cost structure of logistics companies can change. The margins of fertilizer and chemical companies can be affected. The currencies of import-heavy countries can come under pressure, and central banks may have to revisit their inflation outlook. Even in recent EIA outlooks, scenarios like a Strait of Hormuz closure have been described as a primary risk for global oil prices. That means uncertainty in the oil market is not just a problem for commodity traders, but also a macroeconomic policy risk. If there is a sudden shock in crude, the whole world has to recalculate. Now let us return to the question of why crude oil should be called an engine, and not just fuel. Fuel runs one thing, an engine gives motion to the whole system. Crude oil does exactly that. It fuels transport, gives feedstock to petrochemicals, drives trade, affects the currencies of importing countries, shapes the state revenues of exporting countries, changes the direction of wars and diplomacy, and leaves its shadow even on consumer inflation. That is why crude oil is not just a commodity, but a systemic input of modern civilization. Anything whose removal would disturb logistics, industry, inflation, diplomacy, and security all at once cannot be called just a product.
Calling it an engine is more accurate. So the next time you see the meter running at a petrol pump, do not think only that your vehicle's tank is being filled. In reality, the story of the whole world is also running on that meter. Inside it is OPEC policy, the risk of the Middle East, insurance on tanker routes, the chemistry of refineries, the inflation fear of central banks, and even the future tension of your own pocket. If crude oil prices rise, it is not just fuel that becomes expensive. The heartbeat of the entire economic machine becomes faster. And when its flow remains smooth, the trade arteries of the world remain open. That is why the modern world still cannot ignore crude oil. Until some other source replaces it with the same reliability, scale, and strategic reach, crude oil will remain the most dangerous, most necessary, and most influential engine of the global economy.
If this video has taught you something new, or if you feel this information should reach more people, don't forget to like and share the video. Your small share can become valuable and useful information for someone else. If you have any questions related to this topic, or if you would like to share your opinion with us, be sure to write in the comment box. We read every question and suggestion from you, because your feedback inspires us to create better content. And if you want to keep receiving such interesting and reliable information about business, the economy, and the world in the future, then don't forget to subscribe to our channel GRT Business and also press the bell icon so that you get notifications of every new video directly. At GRT Business, we always strive to provide you with accurate, balanced, and reliable information. Our news and analysis are prepared based on information obtained from various news agencies, public sources, and public opinion. We make every effort to verify and validate each fact as much as possible. But in case of any possible error or dispute, the responsibility lies with the respective sources. Our only aim is to present you with a correct and trustworthy perspective so that you can understand any topic better.